Monday, September 13th, 2021, 7:10 a.m., Green Guest House, Mae Sot, Thailand. I have to say that I've been disappointed in the month of September so far. The weather was supposed to improve. I was supposed to be on my scooter in Sukhothai. But it appears that a couple of typhoons have been making life difficult around Asia. I think I saw them called super typhoons in the media. And those weather systems have kept rain clouds firmly in place over Mae Sot. It rained on me during my ride back to Mae Sot from Umphang, and it has rained on me every day since. The sky today, again, is packed with dark gray clouds. It isn't raining right now, just drizzling. But it is enough to keep me largely indoors. I certainly won't be scootering anywhere interesting or far-flung today. It is clearly going to rain most of the day, probably heavily at times. September was also supposed to be a month of restrictions being lifted and some semblance of normalcy returning. And that has also turned out to be largely untrue. I don't see any difference here in Mae Sot. In fact, it looks and feels worse to me. Everything that was closed before is still closed. And many places that I frequent are not just temporarily closed, such as offering only takeaway service, but are completely closed, with shuttered doors. Some have gone out of business and have for sale signs on them. My regular hardware store is one of these. Sadly, that hardware business is gone, the building now empty and up for sale. In September, there was a glimmer of hope that I could find a vaccine to give my immune system a chance to make some preparations and train for the real deal. But that also turned out to be a false hope. And the result of all these factors is that I live in a depressed, muted world, and it appears to be affecting my mood. If my dreams can be taken as an indicator of my mood, then I am tremendously anxious and stressed and worried. I have been unable to sleep much as I wake up constantly from dreams in which I face problems that I can never overcome. I wake up with a pounding heart over and over, and then I can't get back to sleep. I climb out of bed each morning to face the day already defeated and exhausted. Yesterday, my right eye fell victim to this lack of proper sleep, and it developed a terrible pain on one side, and the eye turned bright red as the day passed. It became impossible to keep that eye open, and I walked around with one eye closed, a sleep-deprived and not so jolly pirate. Today, the eye is open, though still red and angry. The mood of Planet Doug is a grim one this morning. But I soldier on. There are positives. I'm astonished at how well this MacBook and I are getting along. We are becoming fast friends. I've even fallen in love with the trackpad. I have long been anti-trackpad. I've hated them. However, it appears that my attitude was the result of using only laptops with very low quality trackpads. This MacBook is not one of those. The MacBook's trackpad works flawlessly, and I've been investing time in learning all the proper multi-finger gestures. Now, I don't even reach for the mouse ever. I'm all about the trackpad. And with that, I must shut down for now and go engage with the real world for a little bit. Boring stuff, though. I have to go to immigration soon, so I thought I would just get it out of the way and go tomorrow. And that means I need to get some photocopies and fill out some forms and get ready. Thursday, September 16th, 2021, 10:20 a.m., BK Coffee and Beer, Mae Sot, Thailand. Well, this is kind of exciting. I'm sitting inside one of my favorite coffee shops instead of inside my guest house room. I don't know when BK restarted dine-in service, but it is open now. I'm here partially because I went to the immigration office to renew my visa, and BK Coffee and Beer is right on my way back into town. My trip to immigration went well. I had all the proper paperwork completed in advance, and submitting my application and getting out the door took perhaps 10 minutes. Though technically this is only the application stage. I have to return on October 1st to see if my application has been approved and then get the official stamp. The approval is somewhat automatic at this stage, so I'm not worried about that, but that is how the system is set up. So I'm not finished yet. I actually shot a YouTube video a while back about this coffee shop. It was a kind of vlog about my day, but also a kind of review of the coffee shop. And I happened to be focused on a variety of Doug-like details. For example, I talked about how the Google Maps pin for this coffee shop was in an incorrect and very confusing spot, so I had trouble finding the place. I also noted that the posted hours were inaccurate and contradictory. One sign said they were open until 6 p.m., another sign said they were open until 7 p.m. I also noted that, as much as I liked this coffee shop and its design and seating, a lot of noise bled into the place from the next door car detailing and car washing operation. I then went on to say a lot of very nice things about the place, particularly how I loved the variety of seating they offered. After I posted that video, I was quite surprised to get a message from the owners saying that they appreciated my video very much and that they had corrected the Google Maps pin. The pin is now in the correct spot, and when I arrived today, I noticed that one of the opening hours signs had been adjusted to match the other. They both now list the correct opening hours. Plus, when I came in, all the doors were open, and a lot of noise was coming in from next door. But once I placed my order and sat down, the clerks closed the doors to block the sound, and they turned on the air conditioner. My hot latte is as good as ever. It's so good. It's by far my favorite coffee in Mae Sot. And I'm pretty sure the women that work here are now well aware of my YouTube hobby and are aware that I featured their coffee shop in a number of videos. They were quite animated in greeting me and making sure I felt welcome and comfortable. I'm now like an official coffee shop reviewer and getting special service because of that. I have a few random and somewhat trivial thoughts about yesterday. I left off yesterday morning just as I was leaving the guest house to run some errands. My landlady happened to be sitting at a table outside my room, and I stopped to chat with her for a minute. She'd been out there several days in a row, surrounded by piles of official-looking books and papers and forms. And almost against my better judgment, I decided to ask her about all the papers and books on the table and what exactly she was doing all day. I learned quite a while ago that she actually taught English once, and I suggested to her that perhaps she had started teaching again. Is that what all these papers were about? She said no, and then she tried to tell me what the papers were for, and I didn't really understand anything. She said something about after COVID, and she talked about the government and 5,000 of something. And not just in Mae Sot, but 5,000 of these things everywhere. And she wound her story up with references to her garden and fertilizer and government reports. I had no hope of putting any of that together into any kind of coherent form, so I just nodded and moved on. But apparently, 5,000 government agents are coming to inspect her fertilizer use, and she has to prepare reports for them. Why this would happen, or why it would take weeks to prepare the fertilizer reports, I have no clue. From there, I walked to my local neighborhood photocopy shop to make copies for my immigration visit. That visit was interesting in ways that perhaps are only interesting to me, but I have thoughts. For one thing, customers are no longer allowed inside. In the past, I would go inside and sit down at a computer and printer and copier and make all my own copies. But I can't do that anymore because of COVID, and I have to hand everything over to the women at the entrance, and give them instructions as to what I need. Obviously, there is no way that this would end up with me getting what I actually want. In this case, I needed photocopies of the first 7 or 8 pages of my passport. These were all pages with visa stamps on them. After that, the pages are blank, since it is a relatively new passport. I explained this as best I could using a combination of English and sign language. After that, I could only hope that this woman would draw on common sense, and even if my instructions weren't clear, she'd realize that I didn't actually need copies of all the remaining blank pages. She took my passport and other documents deep inside the office, and she got to work. And then a lot of time passed. So much time passed that I felt sure that she was making copies of my entire passport. But at this point, there was no way to back up and try to get this sorted out. From past experience, I knew that it was best to just leave things alone. Once you place your order or give your instructions, it's best to just let things take their course. To try to confirm anything or correct anything mid-task will surely lead to much more confusion than already exists. In the end, my suspicions were correct, and she had gone ahead and photocopied all the blank pages in addition to the ones I actually wanted. This was a bit of an annoyance because I actually needed 4 copies of each page, and I needed them in color. And with their equipment, making color copies takes a long time, and of course, it costs a lot more than normal copies. The interesting part of the story for me is how people in general handle these situations. My standard policy is always to just let it go. Why make a big deal about these things that, after all, you can't change? The problem stems from my inability to speak Thai, after all. So whatever problems arise are 100% my fault. I just take the resulting problems on the chin and move on with my life. If I order a latte in a coffee shop and I get black coffee instead, I just pay for the black coffee and sit down and enjoy it. If I order noodles and I get fried rice instead, I just happily enjoy the fried rice. I don't try to tell them that they got my order wrong. What do I care whether I have noodles or rice for that particular lunch? And when this woman handed me a giant stack of color photocopies that I didn't need, I simply smiled and accepted them and paid her for them. But I have known many foreigners that would make a big stink and argue and refuse to pay for the extra copies. I prefer to simply smile and say thank you and get on with the rest of my day. Why make them feel bad? The problem came from the COVID-19 restrictions and from my linguistic failings, neither of which she can control. It's not her fault. On the other side of the photocopy shop is one of my favorite spots in Mae Sot, a small, boutique-y kind of Indian cafe. I hadn't been there for a while because it is also closed to dine-in service. But I had a nice chat with the owner. He's a young guy that shares my interest in technology. We often have an interesting conversation about cameras and laptops and tablets. But while there, I noticed that they were selling a new type of face mask. I took a close look at them, and they were listed as KF94 masks from South Korea. Since the beginning of this pandemic, I've been hearing about the N95 face mask. Everyone keeps saying that if you want real protection, you have to get these N95 masks. But of course, they've never been available here. The only masks available have been the standard imitation blue or white surgical masks. I don't even know if they are effective, to be honest. My feeling has been that they aren't great. I can feel all the air I'm breathing going out the sides and coming back in along the sides. And they all blow moist air upwards and fog up my glasses. With all that leakage around the edges, it's not reasonable to assume that they are actually doing much in terms of filtering the air I'm breathing in or out. I've long wanted to try something different. If I have to wear an uncomfortable mask, I might as well wear one that works, right? I had tried a few specialty masks that I found in stores, but they were all worse than the blue ones, and they didn't fit my head either. They were all far too small. I decided to try out this KF94 mask, and I'm pleased to report that this mask feels like the real deal. It has an actual design and shape. The blue masks are more or less just flat pieces of material that you stretch over your mouth and nose. But this KF94 cups my mouth and nose nicely and curves underneath my chin just right. The metal wire in the nose piece is quite strong and, when adjusted, hugs my nose and cheeks nicely. It rides up my cheekbones a fair distance, and my glasses end up sitting over top of the mask flaps. Best of all, it is much stiffer, and it actually holds its shape while I ride my scooter at speed. The blue masks are so flexible that they get blown against my lips, and would even get blown inside my mouth if I open my mouth to speak. And the material of the blue masks can be quite rough, and it scratches my skin in an uncomfortable fashion. This KF94 holds its shape and sits out and away from my lips, even when I'm riding fast on the scooter. It's so much more comfortable. And I can see that the air I'm breathing is actually going through the mask material and not around it. It's a completely different beast. Using it yesterday and today drives home just how useless the blue masks probably have been all this time. On the negative side, I have just the smallest impression that this mask wasn't designed for my somewhat larger face and head. It feels just a tad on the small size, but it still fits. Plus, since the air really is going through the mask material, I can feel that it is just that little bit more difficult to breathe. When I went to the immigration office this morning, I felt a bit lightheaded and woozy as I walked from my scooter to the building. I felt like I wasn't getting quite enough oxygen into my blood. I was breathing harder and yet still not feeling quite right. I did a bit of reading yesterday, and I guess the 94 in the name relates to a percentage reading of the effectiveness of the mask. It is 94% effective at filtering out stuff from the air, and the famous N95 is 95% effective. So, for all intents and purposes, this KF94 is just as good as the N95. So, after 18 months of living through a pandemic, I finally have an effective face mask. That seems a bit late, but as they say, better late than never. To be honest, I think the best protection I've had is just my current isolation. For a year and a half, I've pretty much spent no time with any other people. I have been the master of social distancing. The fact that my blue masks were useless was probably irrelevant because I wasn't spending time near other people anyway. There has been very little sharing of air going on. Just as a quick aside, this is the packaging for the KF94 mask that I was talking about in that journal entry. And it's from Korea. I can tell, it's got the Korean writing on the front. I recognize Korean because I used to live in Korea. And I'm assuming K stands for Korean. Korean face mask 94. Could be. The funny thing is that after a year and a half, as I said, the only masks available were the cheap blue ones everywhere. You can still see them all over Mae Sot. There's like shelves packed with boxes and boxes of them. And that's all I could get ever. And then seemingly overnight, the KF94 appeared everywhere. Everyone is selling them now. Everywhere I go in Mae Sot, every shop is selling KF94. So I guess Thailand as a whole just got a massive shipment of these just like overnight, and the market has just been flooded with them, which is very cool. And this is the mask itself. and it has a very different shape and design. I'll put it on just for a little quick demo. So I don't know if this comes across, but the bottom really scoops underneath and is curved and goes right around underneath my chin, which I like a lot. And then this metal part is quite strong, and when I press it in, it really tightens up on my nose, very, very well. And because it's stiffer, there's all this space between my lips and the mask material, so I can speak normally even when I'm riding the scooter. The wind doesn't blow it against my lips. And I found that when I put on glasses, they don't fog up when I'm speaking. So these have improved the quality of my life a great deal. I got 2 packages of them to start, black ones and white ones. So the KF94, a new feature of Planet Doug. Tuesday, September 21st, 2021, 7 a.m., Green Guest House, Mae Sot, Thailand. In a twist, I actually have a story to tell from yesterday. Something actually happened. And the happy result is that my body is currently swimming in Pfizer vaccine and busy preparing its defenses for if and when the real virus shows up. I was finally able to register for one of the vaccine programs. When I showed up at the vaccine clinic, I found a large room with 220 chairs set out in 10 socially distanced rows. The local resident English expert was summoned to help me, and I was led to chair number 12 of row number 1. 11 people were sitting there already, and I simply took the seat behind the last person. And then, to my surprise, a medical team showed up at the front of the row with a trolley, and they simply went down the row like it was an assembly line and started jabbing needles into arms. I was having so much fun. I just love to watch systems and procedures and think about how they developed that system and what was good about it or bad about it. They clearly started with 6 pre-loaded needles for the first batch. My understanding is that the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept in extremely cold containers and handled under strict conditions. So they had taken the first vial from a special cold freezer or refrigerator somewhere behind the scenes and divided it into 6 doses. These 6 needles were placed inside a special container on that trolley, and they were quickly injected into the arms of the first 6 people. I noticed that they had an efficient procedure for the rolling up of the sleeve, for checking paperwork, for removing stickers and putting these stickers on paperwork, and for sterilizing the arm with alcohol wipes. 3 women worked as a team to do this. And I noticed that they carefully rolled the trolley past the shoulder of the next person so that the person being inoculated didn't actually see the needle being removed from the container and prepared. This was all done somewhat behind the person and out of their field of view. I assumed this was done on purpose just in case needles freaked out anyone. Once they reached the end of the first batch of 6 needles, there was a lull in activity. 2 of the women left, and I guess they went back to wherever the vaccine was in cold storage to get the second vial, the next 6 doses. The 5 women ahead of me in the line were all nurses or doctors, as far as I could tell, and they waited patiently and seemed to know what they were doing, so I followed their lead in how to behave. After 10 or 15 minutes, the women returned with a new container containing the next 6 needles, and they went down the line until they got to me. There was some extra discussion of me and my form, but my case didn't seem to present any significant problems, and I was given the vaccine in an efficient manner. I think the whole thing surprised me because I assumed that we would each be taken somewhere somewhat private for the actual injection. I'd seen lots of videos on YouTube of people getting their shots, and people were usually separated and given the injection individually, if only behind a simple curtain. But at this clinic, they came to you out in the open. They just rolled the trolley down the line of chairs and gave you the injection right where you were sitting. It was very efficient. While I was sitting there, I noticed that on the other side of the room, two much longer rows of local people were getting vaccinated. I assumed they were getting the Sinopharm or Sinovac vaccine. I'd heard people speaking here and there, and from what they were saying, that's kind of what I understood. And a woman at the front was making a lot of loud announcements over giant portable speakers, and I assumed these were all about potential side effects of the vaccine and what to do if you experience them. And I think there were instructions about how we were supposed to remain in our seats for 15 minutes after our injection, just to make sure there were no adverse reactions and that no one passes out and hurts themselves. I didn't understand any of this, but I took my cue from the women ahead of me, and since they remained in their seats, I remained in mine. I noticed them pointing to a clock on the wall and discussing how far the big hand would have to move until they were free to leave. I waited until all of them had finally gotten up and left their seats before I got up from mine. At the beginning of this whole process, I had been given a slip of paper which indicated the date of this first dose, and it also showed the date of my second dose, 21 days later on October 11th. It also listed the times of 8:30 to 11:30 and then 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. I wasn't clear about exactly when I was supposed to return, so before I left, I went back to the windows and spoke with the woman who had originally helped me. She crossed out those times and said that I should come back at exactly 9 a.m. on October 11th, and she wrote that down. So I was glad that I had checked with her. Plus, I wanted to thank her again and somehow get her to understand how much it meant to me that I was able to get this vaccine. I told her that she had made me a very happy man. You'd think that we were getting married. It's funny that getting vaccinated is actually a big deal on social media. I have seen lots of pictures on social media of people proudly wearing "I got the vaccine" stickers or something like that. I get it, but I also find proudly declaring that you got vaccinated to be a bit odd. For me, it isn't something to be proud of necessarily. I'm happy about it, but I'm not proud of it. It's just common sense and a health issue for me. If you break your arm, it's not like going to the hospital and getting the bone set and getting a cast is something to be proud of. It's just what you would naturally do for your own benefit. It doesn't make you a good person. If you cut yourself, you disinfect the wound and apply a Band-Aid. You wouldn't then feel proud of yourself for doing so and put on a sticker saying, "I put on a Band-Aid." But we have this situation where people post pictures of themselves with their "I got the vaccine" stickers on their chests, as if they had just done something admirable. Even this clinic in Mae Sot had a selfie station set up. There was a bench with a big, colorful backdrop and fake trees. And after you got vaccinated, you could sit there and have your picture taken, and with vaccine-related signage in the background, and then you could post that to your social media. I understand that getting vaccinated also plays a role in protecting other people around you, and I suppose you can be proud of that, but still, it feels a little bit odd. And that is the end of my vaccination story so far. I have to wait 3 weeks and then return for my second dose, and then I can join the privileged ranks of the fully vaccinated. I'm still kind of reeling in disbelief that I've managed to get this taken care of. I believe about 20% of the population of Thailand is fully vaccinated right now. I'll soon be among their number and breathing that rarefied air. Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021, 7:08 a.m., Green Guest House, Mae Sot, Thailand. Yesterday was another lost day, I'm afraid. I had big plans, but I was so tired that I didn't accomplish much. I think the excitement of getting the vaccine was so great that my brain simply wouldn't shut off at night, and I wasn't able to sleep. Circumstances also got in the way. I had plans to shoot a couple of videos, in fact, and I packed up all my camera gear and went to the BK coffee shop. My idea was to set up the camera in their back garden and enjoy a good coffee while babbling into the lens. I just wanted to get out of this guest house room for a while. But that didn't work out. For some strange reason, BK was buzzing with customers, and it wasn't a comfortable setting for my video plans. Plus, the car wash next door was extremely busy, and so much noise poured over into the coffee shop garden that I was unable to record anything. A certain amount of clumsiness is a sure sign that I'm in bad shape. It's a sign that I'm not myself. I pride myself on not dropping things, and on those rare occasions when I do drop something or knock something off a table, I like to think I have cat-like reflexes to catch it before it hits the ground. And if I ever fail to catch that item, it's a sign that it's a bad day and I should be careful. It would probably be best to just go back to bed. And while I was at BK, I decided to give up on the garden video recording session, and if I wasn't going to be filming anything, there was no point to sitting out there in the heat. So I decided to move into the air-conditioned interior. It was a bit of a complicated move because I had all my camera gear, plus a hot latte, plus a hot cup of tea. I moved my latte first, and I guess I did it wrong. The door into the interior is very heavy, and I had to lean my whole body weight into it with my shoulder to open it, and while I did this, the door jostled my arm and I spilled some of my latte. I was embarrassed about that. I hate spilling things and making a mess. Spilling anything is another sign that I'm not in the best shape. Then, when I returned to the guest house later on, something else happened. I first parked my scooter in a narrow spot, but it was too narrow, and I decided to move it to a new spot. And because I was so tired and so out of it, I neglected to flip up the kickstand while I moved the scooter. So I put my feet on the ground and pushed the scooter backwards, and the kickstand slammed into the top of my left foot and cut it open. It was a painful moment. I lost my balance for a second, and the full weight of the scooter went through the metal of the kickstand onto my foot and crushed it as well as cutting it open. I was definitely not awake enough to be out there in the real world. I was a danger to myself, and that overwhelming fatigue stuck with me throughout the day. And that's pretty much it for the whole day, except for some unwelcome tension surrounding my visa status. A guy named Richard Barrow runs a popular Twitter channel. He's lived here in Thailand for years, and he posts a lot of helpful information for foreigners. And yesterday, I was delighted to see that he posted a notice that immigration had extended the COVID-19 visa program for another 60 days, which would allow me to stay in Thailand until the end of January. I hadn't seen this news anywhere else, but Richard is extremely reliable and has exceptional official sources for everything he reports. He's almost always right, so I was very happy about that. But then I saw other articles online saying that the COVID-19 visa program was going to be canceled. And Richard left another post saying that the emergency decree in Thailand was going to be rescinded in October. And because of that, immigration might reverse the course on their decision to extend the special COVID-19 visa program. So the day was a roller coaster ride of optimism and then pessimism about my official status in the country. I haven't checked the news yet this morning to see if anything changed overnight. I'll do that now. I just checked, and there's no new information. Over the last few days, my pop culture interest took a quick dive into comedy horror. I watched the new movie *Malignant* by James Wan. It is 100% bonkers, but I was intrigued. I think as a movie, it would work best for people that are already deeply steeped in the horror genre and can see the inside jokes and insanity for what it is. I saw a bunch of YouTube reviews where the person hated the movie because it was so cheesy and campy in places. But I guess they didn't realize that the cheesiness was done on purpose as a kind of joke and homage. And in this horror mood, I also watched the new Candyman. And that made me rewatch the original Candyman so that I could put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And I watched the latest offering from M. Night Shyamalan, the movie Old. I knew it would be awful, and it was. But I was intrigued by the premise. Since it was an M. Night Shyamalan movie, it was no surprise that it made no sense and that the dialogue was very unnatural. But I'm glad I watched it just because it made a pretty big splash in pop culture circles. I like to keep up with what people are talking about. Thursday, September 23rd, 6:15 a.m., Green Guest House, Mae Sot, Thailand. I got some sad news yesterday. I don't know this guy personally, but there is a Canadian cyclist and YouTuber that I've been following for years. He's a well-known figure in the cycling community and on social media. His name is Johan Gorgiev. That's the name of his YouTube channel as well. For the last 6 or 7 years, he has been taking video of his long cycling journeys. And he's a total wild man when it comes to cycling. He goes on these crazy adventures into deep wilderness where no bicycle should ever go. He's only 33 years old, but I got the news yesterday that he killed himself. There were no details in the stories other than that he apparently suffered terribly from insomnia due to sleep apnea. He was basically tired all the time because he couldn't sleep. I'm sure there were other contributing factors, but as people talked about him and why he killed himself, the only specific thing they mentioned was how much he struggled with ongoing fatigue. And the assumption is that he just couldn't take it anymore and decided to end his life early. His case is one of those that just leaves you kind of pondering people and their lives. What I mean is that his videos are all about the beauty of the world, and people all over took inspiration from his videos. Because of his crazy lifestyle and his passion for exploring the world on his bicycle, people admired him and even were inspired by him to do the same thing. He just seemed like the kind of guy that had it all figured out. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he kills himself. It just leaves you puzzled to an extent. I guess it makes you look at all people in a new light as you wonder what personal and internal struggles they have that you don't know about. Johan's style of travel and cycling never appealed to me very much. He liked isolated wilderness, whereas I like to visit populated areas. Still, there was much to admire. The dude was unstoppable and tough. I can't even imagine doing the things that he did. He was a true adventurer. I wouldn't want to do the things he did, but I couldn't do them anyway. I know I'm not nearly tough enough. I'd be miserable enduring the conditions that he put himself through, not to mention the uncertainty. And I wonder if COVID had anything to do with his decision to end his life. I've been following the lives of all kinds of travelers around the world, and all of them have had to make major adjustments. They just can't do the things they used to take for granted. Maybe Johan just didn't know what to do with himself now that he could no longer just wander the world somewhat aimlessly. He might have been forced to stay in one place with no dreams of the next journey to give him inspiration and hope for the future, and he just gave up. This next sad story doesn't affect me even indirectly, but yesterday I was listening to an interview with one of my favorite MMA fighters, Carlos Condit. Carlos just retired from the sport, and he was being interviewed on one of my regular podcasts. And he mentioned that his best friend had very recently died from COVID. He'd known this guy since the 5th grade, and they're both young, but his friend got COVID and died. It's one thing to look at the charts online and see that X number of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people died in this or that country. But it's quite another to hear a specific story about an individual person. It made me appreciate even more that I was able to get at least the first dose of a vaccine and that the second dose is scheduled. I don't think of myself as being in an at-risk group, but lots of people on social media keep telling me that I'm old and at risk. And I'm actually living in a high-risk area. As I walk around and chat with people here, they sometimes tell me about someone they know that died, or they point to a house across the street and say, someone died here or there. That's not to say that I walk around in fear of death and dying. I don't think I have any fear of death at all. I'm far too logical for that. But I'd much rather not fall seriously ill right now if I can help it. That would be a very large problem for me and my life. That is a problem that I don't need. Switching gears for a moment, when I woke up this morning, I found myself thinking about a recent documentary I watched called Fantastic Fungi. I've long been fascinated by the world of fungi, mushrooms, and mycelium. They come up often when you listen to a lot of science-based podcasts and pay attention to those kinds of topics when they pop up in TED Talks and on YouTube videos. It even shows up in pop culture lately. A large part of the latest season of Legends of Tomorrow was all about fungi. Apparently, a massive mushroom organism on Earth was actually an alien power that protected Earth from aggressive invading species in the universe. The topic just seems to be out there in the zeitgeist right now. A large part of the plot of the show Star Trek Discovery was even based on the concept of using a type of interstellar mycelium network to travel instantly across vast distances of space. And after watching Fantastic Fungi, I have some thoughts. I was very impressed and very surprised by the time-lapse photography in it. It looked amazing. I love time-lapse photography. I've always found it fascinating, and the time lapses in that documentary were incredible. I loved those. I wasn't a big fan of the rest of the documentary, though. I wasn't quite sure what it was trying to do. At times, it seemed like a biography of the life of Paul Stamets. Other times, it seemed like a commercial for his company. And then it felt a bit cultish to me, with people seeming to worship at mushroom altars and cheering ecstatically as Stamets raised a mushroom above his head during a TED Talk. And there was a lot of anthropomorphizing going on, with the talk of trees worrying about their babies. They even had long periods of narration, with them pretending that this was the voice of mushrooms themselves, telling their long life story. And at times it seemed to veer into the territory of New Age mysticism and hyperbole about the power of fungi. It was a bit of a mixed bag of stuff that didn't really speak to me. I guess I was expecting more of a scientific or biological approach rather than the mystical. And they made a lot of sweeping claims without having a whole lot of fact or logic behind them. It was still interesting, though. As I said, I was particularly impressed with the photography. In a way, it seemed almost too good. It felt like that time-lapse content could have formed the heart of a major IMAX release. I'd love to sit in a big theater and watch an hour and a half of that. And some of the stories they told in that photography were mind-blowing. I'm thinking of the story of these termites and the termite guards that prevented infected termites from returning to the colonies, and then took them away to kill them, and then allowed themselves to die to protect the colony. The story was amazing, but how they showed it in the photography was even more amazing. But I kept wondering about what felt like an imbalance in terms of quality and expense. It just seemed like that time-lapse photography would have been extremely expensive and require a major investment of time. As I said, it felt like something a major corporation or James Cameron would make for an IMAX movie. But then the Stamets biography content felt comparatively cheap and a bit flimsy, like it was part of a much less costly and far less professional production. That imbalance just felt weird to me. But I really enjoyed it, and there were lots of new ideas and information to ponder. It's raining this morning, by the way. That's depressing.